Our first speaker today is Debarati Das from the University of Minnesota Department of Computer Science, and their talk is titled Under the Surface, Tracking the Artifactuality of LLM-Generated Data. Please welcome Debarati.
Hi, everyone. My name is Debarati, and I go by Deb. So I'm a PhD candidate at the University of Minnesota from the Department of Computer Science. I have the chance to work at Minnesota NLP Lab. And my talk today is titled, Under the Surface, Tracking the Artifactuality of LLM-Generated Data. This is a really special project to me because it's our first lab-wide project, and I had the chance to be the project lead on it and a contributor. So with that, let's get started. So as you all know, LLMs today, ChatGPT, is really big. You can use it for all sorts of different tasks, like multitask generalization. You can figure out what are human preferable responses. You can use it to power generative search engines. I'm sure a lot of you have seen like these recommended responses while you're using Google, which is actually generated by GPT, right? And LLMs have now become multimodal, so now you can probably upload an image and get some queries based on that as well. There's a lot of tool integration, which means that you can actually power a lot of APIs with LLMs. And now, with this year, there's a lot of push towards generative agents. LLMs are really exciting, and a lot of people are feeling that LLMs are a rising source of data. This thing on the right-hand side should be quite familiar to a lot of you, where you basically write a prompt and give it a little bit of examples towards the kind of output that you'd like to get. This is the format that most of the people are using. This is called in-context learning, and that is in-context learning, and this is helping LLMs to generate a good source of data. It's become really popular, and LLMs can label data almost as fast as humans. At least that's what the papers are saying. And you can say that here are some examples of titles from different articles and papers where they're saying that LLMs can save money, time, carbon with their inputs, and they can even possibly replace human participants. This potential of LLMs has been recognized in many of these papers where we can find that LLMs can actually outperform crowd workers like MTurkers in many labeling tasks, right? And for example, here you can see that the dark orange and red are actually the LLMs, and the other two are the humans. And you can see that LLMs are outperforming the humans in these labeling tasks. This is also recognized by humans themselves, where this paper actually shows that a lot of Turkers are using LLMs themselves to actually do the task, which means that all these ground truth data sets that we have, where we rely on them and think that they are the standard, are actually having a little bit of introduction of synthetic data, because these people are using LLMs as well. This has an implication, and let's walk through this little bit of an example where we can see what kind of implication there might be. Let's imagine there's an LLM that is generating some sort of free text output. And let's say it has a little bit of an artifact which is present inside it, which makes it different from human-generated data. Now we have another LLM which uses this as an input to do some kind of classification task, which basically means it's taking text A as input and trying to figure out whether it's happy, sad, or neutral. The artifact that was originally present in this data might now become a little bit bigger because an LLM is doing the task. The same input can be used by another instruction-tuned model, which is using these instructions to generate similar other instructions. So here you can see this LLM is looking at these examples of classification instructions and generating another parallel instruction, which says something like, given a sad text A, write it as funny. The artifact which was there in the original classification data now becomes bigger. The same input can be used again to generate free text, and now we're back at square one with a lot of artifacts, right? So this is basically implying that there might be actually the rise of the LLM ecosystem. This has been explored in this paper, which explores the curse of recursion. The idea here is that as you make multiple generations with an LLM, the models degrade over the generation, where every new generation is trained on the data which is made by the previous generation. So you can see with the input, which is actually talking a little bit about Masons, as we get to generation number 9, we're now talking about jackrabbits, right? So this is actually a little bit of a problem, and that is something that that was hinted at, and that is kind of the inspiration towards our data, our exploration. And we try to ask the following research questions. First, what are these different LLM-generated texts? What do they look like? What is the difference, right? What is the gap between LLM-generated data and human-generated data? What does that look like? Okay, we're back. And then, are there implications of training on this LLM-generated data? So in this talk, I'm going to be telling you a little bit about that. Let me tell you a little bit about the kinds of LLM-generated data that we have explored. We're starting with the most constrained form of data, which we are calling task-labeled data. Basically, the idea is, given a specific kind of task, you want to produce only a label for that task. So here we're doing sentiment analysis. Given a text, you want to predict whether it's positive or negative. So there's just one label for this task. The second kind of LLM-generated data is what we're calling preference, right? Given two sentences, you want to figure out which sentence is more preferred by the human or the GPT, right? This is still very constrained. We increase the level of constraint as we move to instructions, right? Given a couple of instructions, can you generate a similar instruction, right? Then the fourth kind of data that we look at is simulation data. Given the context and given the agents that are supposed to be like talking, can you generate the simulated conversation between them? As you can see, we are increasing the constraint on the text data as we move ahead. Finally, we have the free-form text data. So in this case, what we basically have is we provide the kind of data set, the kind of data that we would like the model to generate, and it can take any kind of direction that it wants to go. It can basically go in that direction, and that's why it is basically the most, it's the least constrained out of all of the data. So this is our breadth. We are starting from task labels and going all the way to freeform, and we're basically going to do a little bit of stress testing as described on the next slide. So here we are going to do the first kind of stress testing, which is what we are calling first order, which is basically we try to see what is the difference between the human and the LLM-generated data. The kind of methods that we use change with each kind of data, because as you can understand, it's not possible to use the same method across each of these data, right? So the methods that we use are human validation, where you have a human come in and examine the LLM output and see whether it's good or wrong, right? And then you have qualitative data set, where you basically look for patterns within that data, right? Then you have correlation analysis, where you compare the labels that are produced by humans versus the labels that are produced by LLMs. Then we have distributional differences, where basically you have the distributions of the LLM labels and or preferences, and the human labels or preferences. Then we also examine label flipping. Is it possible that the LLM predicts something, but when the human is looking at the same text, the label flips, right? Then we'll try to look at some artifacts that are present in the data as well. The second thing that we try to look at is the second-order stress testing methods. Once we have explored that there already exists some sort of artifact which is present through the first-order testing, we want to make sure that we take the human data and train models to which use that human data as input, and then we take the LLM-generated data and train models which use that as input and examine whether the artifacts are amplified. Our key takeaways is that even though we think that LLMs are so great and doing so good, under the surface, we find that LLMs are not great at mimicking diverse opinions and complex expressions. They struggle a lot when handling unknown and unfamiliar situations. They mimic human problem solving at a very surface level, and amplification of artifacts is observed after training. In this talk, I'm going to basically focus a lot more on the task labels and preference kind of data in the interest of time. I'll give you a quick glance on the results from the rest of the data. With that, let's get started. So the first kind of data is the task label data, where basically, given the text, you have a set of labels that you want the LLM to choose, which is most corresponding to that text. So for example, if the text is, "It is wrong to be racist to other people," the LLM chooses the label 3, right? The output is here, in this kind of data, the output is constrained to one or more labels given a context. Why is this a challenging data set? Why do we need LLMs for this? Because it's very costly and very time expensive to basically have humans do this kind of task instead. Accuracy is also something that you're trading off for. This has already been observed by a lot of people who are using GPT instead of LLM to do these kind of tasks. And they are observing that actually it's costing 96% less to use GPT instead of the humans, right? These task labels are hugely applied in other fields, especially like in computational social science fields, where you can use techniques like zero-shot prompting to just get answers to each of these questions. There are some issues that have been seen with these LLM task labels, and that was mentioned earlier in the talk today. One is that we are using a model which is having training data with inherent bias, right? So that's going to reflect on the kind of label that you are choosing in the end. LLMs also struggle with social and cultural nuanced context, which basically means that there is a need for human collaboration and experts with LLMs. And this has been recognized by companies like Megagon Labs, where they're developing human and LLM collaborative annotation systems. So what happens here is the human and the LLM annotate together. LLM does the annotation, human tells the LLM it's wrong. Do it again, right? Something like that, right? So in our lab, we are doing similar things as well, and I'll lightly touch upon that towards the end. To scope our project down, we fixate on subjective tasks. And why? The reason is, in this case, let's say you have the subjective task is to label offensive text, right? Usually what happens is the subjective variance is lost when you take the majority vote. So for example, if you have this text that says women should stay in the kitchen, if you take the majority vote, you lose the opinion of the 2 women whose opinion you should probably keep, right? So in that situation, we'd like to make sure that we want to understand how do minorities respond to important issues. Is there more personalized data analysis? And it could actually lead to more fine-grained prediction, right? Similarly, demographic information is also lost when you take the majority vote. And this could actually help. If you kept it, it could help in unearthing systemic bias and ethical issues. We also lightly touched upon the model collapse problem earlier, where basically the models establish a ground truth while training and then kind of distort their behavior towards this perceived truth. This has a lot of impact in like subjective data sets like morality and controversy, where you don't want the model to just predict one thing, right? So therefore, this motivates our research questions for stress testing, which is that can an LLM reflect a minority opinion in subjective tasks? Do existing biases in the training data get amplified? The subjective data sets that we look at are data sets which involve controversy, sentiment, offensive, and hate speech detection. And let me tell you a little bit about the experiment, right? So imagine you have the task, which is offensiveness detection, and your labels of choice are no, yes, and maybe. We take this text and we give it to an LLM group and a human group. So we have this human group where here you can see that the woman in the group probably does not think this is offensive because contextually she knows why, right? But the men actually think it's offensive. What do the LLMs think? If there was like the experiment done with the LLM group, we actually observed that the LLMs all think it's offensive, which basically means you lost the opinion of the woman in the group, right? So how do we create this LLM group? We basically have this experiment set up where we have instances of ChatGPT, Vicuna, and Bayes, and other such models, and we simulate diversity in the response by varying temperature and top P parameters, and we take the majority from each of these groups, and they're like representations of a human, right? And we create this intermodel setup, and that becomes basically our intermodel group. So our first finding is that we basically have, let's say you have the labels which are generated by the human, and then you have the labels which are generated by the LLM. The majority is basically 2 in the first case, while the minority is 1. You can see here that there's a majority match between the humans and the LLMs, but there's no minority match, which basically means that minority representations, in this case, we see are represented inadequately by ChatGPT. When we look at variation, we're able to observe that humans are showing a lot more variation in their annotation labels as opposed to ChatGPT, which basically means that ChatGPT is actually better at mimicking a consensus among the human annotations. We also look at this qualitatively, where here you can see clearly for this text, this old dog needs to learn some new tricks. You can see what the humans have felt, and the LLMs have just consistently just chosen one option, right? We look at disagreement as well, and here we see that there is a lot of difference between what a human thinks should be the 0 label is actually what the model predicts as the 2 label, right? So that actually shows that you can't actually use a human and an LLM in the same space, especially if it's a subjective task. In the interest of time, I'm going to skip some slides and move a little bit towards the next data set, which is basically preference label. And in preference label, basically, the kind of task it is given 2 sentences. We like to figure out which sentence is more preferred by the LLM, right? Here also, we are constrained to 1 or 2 labels given the choices. Why is this a very interesting task? The reason is that humans actually suffer from some cognitive traps like memory issues and things like that. So if you use a human to do the same task, it would actually be very expensive. So that's why LLMs are used for this. It's hugely popular because GPT 3.5, the backbone of that is actually human preference data. Inherent biases have already been found by other papers in LLM preferences. For example, some biases are things like, okay, they prefer the first response out of a pair of responses, or they tend to focus on irrelevant details. For our task, we actually try to observe a little bit more on we fixate on the tasks of sentiment analysis and QA tasks and try to figure out whether it's focused on the nuanced context or are they just learning some surface level patterns. Let's look at this example. So let's say we have these 2 sentences, and we are trying to figure out which is the more positive sentence. We produce these metrics which are like lexical preference or entailment preference and see which one is GPT trying to mimic, right? So for example, here in the first case, there are multiple lexicons or words which are associated with the positive sentiment, like good, love, much. So it's considered more positive. In the second sentence, it's also positive, but there's a presence of only 1 positive lexicon. So this is a notion of lexical preference, where you can see that the first sentence is more lexically preferred. Similarly, there's an entailment preference. Entailment preference basically tells you how relevant is this sentence B to the sentence A. And if basically your score is higher, that means that it's supposed to be an entailment preference. What we find out is GPT actually tends to follow these kind of surface level patterns as opposed to humans, which basically means that GPT prefers these positively correlated cases with the simple lexical preferences, and human preferences do not. So in the end, what we basically find out is that with the second order analysis, we find out that the artifacts which are present in the machine learning preferences make sure that if you train a RoBERTa model on these machine preferences, you will have lower accuracy than those with human preferences. There are many such interesting results in our paper. And in the interest of time, I will move a little ahead and tell you a little bit about the summary. Yeah, our conclusion is that we find a clear gap between human and artificial data and expose some possible implications of training models on synthetic data. LLM-generated data is mimicking human-generated data on a shallow level, and it overlooks these nuances. So what is really under the surface? We observe a clear disparity when we train on human-generated versus machine-generated data, and this might actually be the rise of artificial intelligence. In this vein, I have a call for research collaboration. We think that in our project, we made a very initial attempt to develop some metrics to find the gap between LLM-generated data and human-generated data. As you can understand, this is going to change with every domain, right? And as you move across every, let's say you move from sentiment analysis to the task of law, right? And any of the specific tasks which are related in that field, you can't use the same metrics. So there's a need for an interdisciplinary collaboration where basically people can come together and contribute to these metrics and figure out what are these metrics which can actually analyze the synthetic data for possible artifacts before you use them to train these models. Which means that we should collaborate with these experts to find out these domain-specific artifacts. In our lab, we have some of these projects. We try to find out a co-taxonomy, where basically we develop a taxonomy which describes a field with the help of the human expert as well as the LLM. There's another project which is in collaboration with lawyers, where we're trying to develop a benchmark to show the artifacts which are present in law data. And we also try to align with societal values, because that's something that we think that LLMs don't understand too well, and you need the humans to inform that. And as a result, we feel that it's something that's really important, and we invite collaborations on this topic. We would like to build tools to build this effective human-AI collaboration to make it easy for humans to actually collaborate with like LLMs and inform their decisions. And finally, if you find an artifact, we encourage everybody, before you generate your data sets, document it. Document it on your data card, release it out loud, and say that this is the domain to which this is applicable, so that everybody who uses your data set to train their models are informed about the consequences that will fall. With that, thank you very much for listening to me. Are there any questions? Yes?
Yeah, I'll just speak up. So during the first talk today, we heard a lot about thresholds. So you say here that you found that LLMs are, oh, thank you. That LLM-generated data sets have these artifacts and are sometimes worse than the human-generated data sets. But have you found that companies care? Like, is the threshold large enough that they're going to spend the extra money to pay the humans to do it? And if so, do you have a sense of like where that threshold lies? Like, is this threshold in your paper large enough that you think that it will make an impact on large corporations?
That's a really good question. So I think that when we looked at the task for like nuanced data sets, like subjective data sets, we find that there is actually a huge amount of mismatch between human opinion and LLM-generated opinion. And I think companies like OpenAI and Microsoft and things like that are actually taking that effort to like include humans into the process, where they can improve these artifacts which are already present in this data set. Is it completely widespread? I don't think so. I think that what happens is if we actually have like these openly available benchmarks which show really clearly that this is the disparity, then it will happen. And the step towards making sure that companies pay attention and actually include this is to develop this benchmark which everybody can actually come look at. Everybody has contributed to, and it shows that this is an actual problem and we can't just use this data as is.
I also have one more follow-up question. Did you do any sort of study on a mixture data set? So if you use a data set that's half generated by LLM and half human, does that result in any sort of benefit?
Well, that's a good question. That's something that we're doing right now. It's our follow-up study. We are interested in looking at AI-assisted data. It's actually not really like it's not actually openly available, this kind of data set already. So it would be great. I think it's a great idea and a good like move towards research to publish this AI-assisted data, because then you can do a little bit of the analysis, right? What's different between human data, what's different between LLM data, and what's different between human plus LLM-generated data. And we will be releasing that soon. Yeah. Yes?
What are your thoughts about having supervised learning within the creation of these data sets?
How do you mean?
So in terms of, being able to create the data sets through these LLMs, and then have a process to identify the bias, and then have human intervention to correct the bias.
Right.
Right? So if you had that in the system, it'd be a closed loop, right?
Yes. So that's active learning. So basically, the idea is that what she said was that well, wouldn't it be nice, like when you're creating the data set, you get a consistent feedback from humans that this is wrong or this is right, and then correct it while it's being created as opposed to doing it towards the end. I completely agree. That's something a lot of people are doing right now. And the answer to that question is actually like you need to find a good representation. Right? Who is the ground truth, right? So that's why we need the domain experts to come together and say, okay, this is your idea of what is right, or the organizations to decide these are the values that we must be following, and then you can do something like that. Yeah. Yeah.
Hi, thank you. Clearly very impressive for 20 minutes talk. I guess this question might be a bit naive, but I guess I'm unsure about how you imagine these synthetic data sets being used. I guess it might be biased from my background's in social sciences. We ask people to label and to answer these things because we want to know what people think. And so I guess that's where the gap is for me, is I'm not sure why we are bypassing that layer. Is the assumption that because these models are trained on, large and large corpus of text that already kind of capture historical human judgment and we can bypass the human layer because of that? So any thoughts on how these data sets are being used would be appreciated.
Yeah. So from my work with the social scientists, here's the take, right? The reason is that in many times, these data sets which are publicly available, which presumably have a good amount of coverage, don't actually have a good amount of coverage. Like if you think about it, all these data sets which are published by Pew Research or anything that is like a survey, right? All these kind of situations, it depends a lot on how you sample. So because it depends on how you sample, it will always have something that is unsampled, right? And in that case, it takes a lot of money, a lot of time, and a lot of energy to get this kind of data which will represent those. So what people are doing, or social scientists are doing, are developing these personas. So what they try to do is they say something like, oh, okay, why don't you mimic somebody who is from this department, having like this age, this gender, this religious belief, and the LLM probably understands those things, right? And it constructs this persona and mimics their opinion. Is the opinion exactly correct? No. But is it better than having nothing? Yes. So that's kind of the reason that they do that. And your question is correct in the sense that is there going to still be a big gap? And I completely agree that there is a big gap. Because no matter what happens, there's still the nuance of human judgment that you're missing. But a lot of the blockage that happens in CSS research is that you don't have the resources to back your study, right? It takes a lot of time to collect the data itself. So that's the reason that they use LLMs to simulate the participants or the labels in the data.
And then they would use that data set for inference?
Yes,
on
they
these
would,
populations?
just like how you would have collected like the human opinions and human, preferences, you would have the LLM preferences, which are just simulating the human preferences. So it's synthetic.
Thank you. Give me a lot to think about and probably fight with my advisor about.
Thank you for your presentation. I have a question. As you mentioned, like in the presentation, LLM can be very efficient and time saving, and especially saving the mining cost spent on the human laborers, right? But on the other hand, I also heard LLM consuming a lot of energy, like with the my question is just how to balance this. One, you want to save the money to not cost on or spend on a human, but at the other time, you spend a lot of money to commit in a GPU, CPU, etc., and to harm the environment. So how to balance it?
That's true. So it's a trade-off. Essentially, the question was, while you're saving on cost on human labor, you're losing out and having an impact on the environment because you're using these energy not so efficient machines, right? So there's a lot of effort being put into that, where they're trying to develop models which are more energy efficient, which basically don't really take so much, what do you say? They don't really use as much CPU or GPU or any kind of resources to actually make this inference. Or like techniques which are involved in optimization, which basically means that you don't put in that much work to like cause that much problem, right? So my take is all of these things are fairly new, right? And there is no actual answer to this question right away. These are parallelly advancing at the same time. It's a good place to do research and figure out how to build energy efficient LLMs. And I think that's something that the companies are doing right now because, well, it costs them the most. So, yeah. Are there any other questions?
Question in the chat, sorry. And they would like to know if the slides will be available afterwards.
Yeah, sure. I think I can make the slides available. Sorry, I had to skip a lot of it, but I'll make it available. Yeah.
I'm so sorry. I have one more question.
Yes.
Just like you mentioned a lot, like in your research, how to find the gap, right? How the minority was underrepresented, but also like LM was controlled by the big tech companies, right? And rich countries like global north. How does the research to reflect how the global south or the other, technological underrepresented into this field? This is also the other underrepresented, right?
Sorry, I didn't catch the tail end of your question.
Oh,
What
okay,
is the,
sorry. Sorry for my explanation. I mean that in your research, you talk about a lot of minority group was underrepresented, right? But also, technology was controlled by the big technology companies, right? And needs a lot of money to spend on it to keep this technology development. And also, when we see this power structure, it's a big tech and also the developed countries like US to control this. But for the other countries or the other smaller companies, they don't have the power also like to compete with big tech. So this is also kind of underrepresented.
yes, I agree.
So how to like make this technology also can be sustainable for those minority technology or economic power?
Yeah, I think this is a concern that is like widely recognized. That's why there's been a lot of increase in open source LLMs in the last couple of years, because not everybody has the resources to pay like this money amount of dollars to run this like wide scale experiments on GPT-4o, right? So there are other alternative open source LLMs that are available. For example, I'm from India, and we have our own open source LLM, right? And that's actually just as good. And there's a lot of effort that's been put in to make sure that you optimize it such that it runs on the resources that we can actually afford. Is it just as good as GPT-4? I think maybe not. The reason is that they came first. They have a little bit of a monopoly in the entire situation. But we are trying to close the gap. And your concern is relevant in the sense that it is something that we should definitely be working towards. Yes?
When you're talking about artifacts from LLM-generated data, is there any sort of existing or in-progress validation suites for this kind of LLM-generated data? Like, is there a readily available software that does this validation? Or is this like a measure that your group has created specifically?
Oh, okay, I understand this question. So basically you were saying, what do you compare against? Right?
Yeah.
Right. And that actually didn't exist. When we did it, it didn't exist. And we had to collect it, and we had to build it. And it's not extensive by any means, but ours is definitely public on Hugging Face, so feel free to go download. But basically, we also encourage everybody to provide these validation data sets so that you can conduct these experiments. Like, since we did this, we had to scope our project down to like X set of experiments to X set of models. As you can see, it would take a lot of resources to do it on a very large scale. But if everybody did it, and there was like a centralized database of all of these validation data sets, against which you could test and these artifacts which are being recorded, then actually it would be quite possible. So yes,
So there's no sort of standard that exists right now for these things, but there are people getting together to create these standards.
yes. So our effort tries to create this sort of like parallel database. Like, okay, here's the human data, here's the LLM generated data, here are the scores on it, right? There are other such benchmarks available online, like Helm and things like that, but they don't actually publish the like the data sets that they're testing with, right? And our focus on this work is a little bit more like look at it on the data level. So I do think that we encourage that kind of collection and aggregation at one point so where everybody can contribute. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Deb.